Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Presentations. How about we do adjustments to the agenda?
I have a number, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
One would be after the presentation from the first, to have a presentation from our assessor regarding the mill rate. And that could go in as item 3.1.
Okay.
If you wish.
Sure.
And then under the consent calendar, we would be discussing the minutes of the July 25th meeting and the August 1st meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay. All right, presentations. Matt, would you like to step up?
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. And for the new members, my name is Matt Weaver, the Chief Investment Officer for First National Wealth Management. We've managed the town's funds since, I think, 2005. So we've had a long-term relationship with the town. I think the large trust fund that I'll discuss first. When we took over, it was just under $1 million. It's now about 2.1 million. So I'd sent out the package to all of you through PEG, and one piece of that package was my quarterly newsletter that I send out to clients. As I mentioned in that newsletter, 2022 was a very difficult year for markets, not only equity markets, but for bond markets. With the Fed raising rates, bond prices go down. So we were hit with a double whammy, if you will, of negative returns on both sides of the portfolio. The good news is that 23, at least year to date, has started off much better than 22, and we've gained a lot of those returns back. If you want to look at the trust fund performance report here, I'll just mention some numbers to you. Year to date, that trust fund is up just under 8%, 7.75 against a benchmark of 7.31. That blended benchmark consists of the S&P 500, which is our main equity benchmark. We have the mid cap, Russell mid cap, S&P mid cap, and the Russell 2000. We have some international benchmarks in here as well, along with the Barclays Intermediate Government Credit, which is the fixed income benchmark. So in dollar terms, what does that mean? From January 1st until last week, the account is up about $151,000. 133,000 of that is unrealized gains, and about 19,000 is interest and dividends. Any questions or comments about the trust?
Just a couple.
Yeah.
One, I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
When the bonds are concerned, it looks to me as though we're in a lot of bond funds. We're not establishing individual bonds with maturity ladders. And I know that's more work for you.
No, it's not.
But in today's world, it might behoove us to have a closer look at arranging the bond investments in that fashion.
It's a good question.
Because we're locking into the return. And we're not subject to market variability that we have on the funds themselves, because they're marked to market.
Sure.
So that's just one comment. The other one is, I'm wondering why we're taking exposure internationally. I'm all in favor of diversification. But we're taking not only foreign exchange risk when we're doing that, we're also assuming potentially some tax liabilities. Although this is a non-taxable entity.
Correct.
You still have to pay taxes on gains you realize on foreign investments to those entities or.
To the entities.
Yeah. So those are my two
Yeah, so the way we look at, the markets, all the markets, right? So not just domestic, but also international. If you break it down, if you look at the Vanguard All World ETF, for instance. Domestic markets make up about 50% of the all world, and then everyone else is the other 50%. So, there's some great companies in other markets, Siemens, for instance, Hyundai. I can go on and on, some great large caps companies that we want to own in the portfolio. And we want that diversification. And I know that international has underperformed domestic markets recently. But there's also been some times in the market where for instance, emerging markets in 05, 06, they were up about 50% each year, right? So, it's not our bias. Our bias is towards large cap domestic companies. That's about 48% of the portfolio, and large cap international is only about 20. So certainly our bias is towards domestic, but we do want to have that international exposure for that, what you just mentioned, the diversification piece. And Dodge Cox International and some of these other funds that we use are very good long-term funds, and fees are low. The fixed income piece that you mentioned, I'm glad you did. In fact, I bought a JP Morgan CD just the other day for not only Waldeboro, but a number of my municipalities. So I'll go out and I'll buy $1 million worth of that CD, and then I'll pro rata, to my towns. That's 5.5% for a year. And what I'm doing there is that our money market though is at 5.12. So there you have a cash return with no risk at 5.12. But I want to lock in, like you said, some of those rates going out 1 year and 2 year and ladder them. Because if the Fed's efforts pay off and we see the economy slow down, they may have to cut rates a couple of times next year, if they go over, where they want to go in terms of inflation.
Mhm.
So if that was to happen, then we're going to see a short-term rates go down, but we've already locked in, the 5.5, 5 3/4 return on the CD. So I am transitioning towards more individual bond investments.
Good.
Yeah, and the reason that we have the funds in there's two reasons. One is for liquidity, so I don't have to sell a CD that I want to hold on to maturity, to have a little bit of liquidity in there. And also, if you remember the TIPS, inflation protected bonds, they're best if you go out and buy them in a fund like Vanguard and have them in the portfolio as a hedge. And they did extremely well compared to other bond investments last year. We've gotten out of that fund, but that's another reason why we use these bond funds in order to hedge and have diversification across the board. But that's a good segue on page 4 of the statement. Some of the CDs that I've picked up recently for the town, the American Express CD, which is the second one down from the top, that's 4.85, which was purchased late last year. We also have the Ally Bank, which is over 5%. That's coming due fairly soon. All of these are pretty short term. I've kept duration very low. I don't want to go out and buy a 10-year right now because the risk return just doesn't make a lot of sense. I'd rather keep it low. And if I'm wrong about rates, and if rates are higher next year, then when these come due, I can just take the proceeds and roll them into a CD that might be 6.5, or wherever the rates are at that time. So it gives us flexibility. Some of the other ones here.
Will you rebalance that though? Like, will you say the rates go down? Will you rebalance that into an equity then, or is it going to stay in cash?
We rebalance when we see equity markets move higher, and it's about a 5% threshold.
Okay.
So we're at 54% equity in this portfolio. It's a 50-50 balance. We're a little over that, but it's worked in our advantage so far this year with how the markets have performed.
Should we be looking at having another look at our investment policy?
It never hurts to look at it.
We've talked about that a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, the trust fund, the largest of the three, is balanced 50-50, which I believe is the correct allocation.
It's 60-40.
60-40 is in the cemetery trust, and the Barron Scholarship are 60-40. You could make the argument you could go 60-40 on this. They're long-term perpetual funds, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna stay around forever.
Not gonna go anywhere.
Not gonna go anywhere. That decision was made many years ago, when we won the town's business, I think back in 07, 06. So, but I think you could. I think you could get them all 60-40. And that would boost the return over the long term.
Would you recommend that?
Yes, I would. Okay. I would, and I can provide some language from other policies if you want to look at them, to give you some insight on what other towns are doing. Yep. And just quickly, so I mentioned the cemetery trust and the Barron Scholarship Fund. Again, like I said, they're 60-40, so they're invested a little more aggressively than the trust fund. And that's reflected in the returns of these two funds. The cemetery fund year to date is up just under 8.5% against a benchmark of 7.96. And the Barron fund is up 9.73. So yeah, when you have a higher allocation to equities or stocks, you should have a higher return when markets are up. So that makes sense that they have a little bit higher return. But you know, if you needed a distribution from that scholarship fund at any point, and you need to talk to me about what your distribution rate should be on an annual basis, I can help you with that.
That would be great.
You know, we sort of default to 4% distribution. And we want to match it up to the allocation that we have in the account. And I think that's a prudent distribution rate is 4%.
I have a question, not about the investment aspects, but this is a big learning curve for me. I didn't know that the town had trusts established. And there's quite a bit of money in it.
Quite a bit of money in it.
Yeah. And I just got my reevaluation, you know. And we're probably going to have a big tax increase later this year. How were these funds established? And I assume there is an endpoint at which this money gets dispersed.
So these are trust funds that were set up. So the Philbrook Fund was a gift. That's one of our funds. We hold, and that's for perpetual support of the poor and needy. The Barron Scholarship and our scholarship fund, they are gifts that keep giving. And even the cemetery funds are from private cemetery organizations that we hold in trust for them to keep the cemeteries mowed and any maintenance that they need.
So this is.
So this isn't our money. This is not
It's
tax.
part of the.
It is,
general
it
fund.
is not taxpayer money. It is
Okay.
totally separate.
But when you look at a payable warrant, you might see a payment that was made to a cemetery association, and then there's this funny little credit debit. That means that it's due to the general fund, which is what you guys would pay bills out of from one of the trust funds. So if you ever see things like that where it's on a report, that's where that comes from as well. 'Cause
And these are perpetual funds. They go on forever. So the principal can't be touched. We literally live off the interest of these.
And so each month,
Funds.
the first will provide a sub accounting, and I'm happy to share that with the board, but it lists each fund and what their market value is and what, a lot of what Matt's already discussing on a monthly basis we also get it on an annual basis, but it has them all on one summary And it's just kind of nice, since they do a good job with that, so
Okay.
we know each one.
And we do manage surplus funds or undesignated funds is what you're
Mhm.
alluding to. Typically, for other municipalities, we generally have a more conservative allocation on those funds. Because they are tax revenue, they're just surplus. But they want to get a higher return than a checking account or the savings account. So they'll ask us to manage it with, let's say, a 25-75 allocation, 25% stocks, 75% bonds and cash.
Mhm.
Just to kind of keep up with growth, to keep up with inflation. So that the buying power of those funds isn't going down every year by 3 or 4% or whatever the inflation rate is at that time. So we do manage those surplus funds. Just to give you some perspective.
Okay, it was just, I wanted to know whether they were tasked to be spent in a certain way.
They definitely are.
Okay.
We have parameters
That
that
was
each,
My
so
question.
each fund has their own parameters and
Restrictions.
restrictions. The Fennelly, what's that one?
So.
We
few years back,
combined 3 funds.
We had a lot of, when he talks about the trust funds, it's actually a few different funds that are combined to the Waldeboro Trust Fund. And the one that Julie's talking about, we had a few old unusual funds with specific purposes, but they all were to benefit the poor or the needy. And so the board went through a process to combine these, the Fennelly, the Standish, and the Matthews Fund into
Matthews.
one. That fund is what helps to pay for the Community Navigator program, which is, you know, same, this meets the same.
But
And
some of them were
results.
very
but
antiquated,
they-
so
Yeah,
yes, you had to be the one fund requested that it could only be used for widows who were a reputable reputation and were not wily women.
used for decades.
Decades and decades.
So,
but-
so anyway, we look at that.
We're allowed to do that under the law.
Yes, we went through the Attorney General's office, everything was, it was approved by a judge to combine these funds, but as the attorney was reviewing these, he was like, does this really say this? I said, that was written in like 1890 and one was like in 1931 and the requirements were funny to look back on now because who would check if the woman was wily? You know, like, guess that's the town manager job.
Overseer of the poor.
Yeah.
About the funds, there's a scholarship fund.
Right.
And that's the George Gentner Scholarship Fund, and we, like Julie was saying, we just manage the money, like the payables.
Right.
And, but we also look at what the distribution amount, what would be available. And but so that had a lot of parameters, and that there's a committee and it all goes through the high school. You know, they have committee meetings, scholarship committee meetings, and there's a whole bunch of rules to that.
Okay, that explains.
And
Yes.
I guess, sorry.
No.
So just to finish up, Bob, just one other point about, the individual fixed income investments. When we meet again, that maybe this time next year, you'll see quite a few more of those in the portfolio. I didn't do it all at once because the Fed's kind of telling us what they're gonna do.
That makes sense.
Right? So if I buy a CD now, and then in September, they raise another quarter point, I can go out and I can get a higher rate, right? So I'm doing it over some time.
Okay, good.
Cool. Anybody else got any questions? You got any questions, Peg? We probably deal with him all the time, so.
Yeah, he's always available when I need him. Lucky.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Matt.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Matt.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See everyone.
Good
Good
meeting.
to see you.
Oh, did he? All right,
Bob did great.
all right. Guess we'll move along to Daryl and setting the mill rate.
So we are ready to pick a rate when you're ready to go. Numbers did change a little from what I originally had handed out. It was discovered that the homestead reimbursement on the form in 3 was at 0.73.
Okay, so
It was supposed to go up 3% a year to 100%. Well, they've gone up to 0.76. But in the current budget, they froze it, so there will be no further increase next year, but we're at 0.76. Had some Betty come in and had some few numbers changed, but anyways, I did hand out your individuals what the different rates would look like. 1560 is basically the lowest we could go. We're at 14 now. That would leave an overlay of 35,000, which would cover overlay. And then you can go on up. You are allowed to go up as high as 5%. I don't imagine you going above the 16 mil rate, which would be 321,000. So you can pick something in between, or what have you, any questions on?
What's your recommendation, Joe?
He likes round numbers.
I love the 11, but that would have $1,000 increase on last year's 1,000, so I don't recommend we do that. I would go with 1560. Again, I've always gone on the conservative side, but
What do we,
are the individuals that know what you have, the budgets down the road. Any overage goes into undesignated, which then you can, since you're aware.
I remember, I know we go with a certain amount for a layover, overlay. I can't remember what we typically make sure we have there for an overlay. I know at 0.56, 0.156, you get it set at 35,000.
Correct.
Um,
Last year it was 128. That should be your last page showing you the difference between the 14 of last year and this year.
And we just want to mention that since Abden is a representative, he cannot vote on this, but he can participate in the discussion.
So you only have 4 assessors, you have 5 select. But his hat has to come off as an assessor.
Yes.
But what do we, I know there's a number we typically have saved as a overlay.
Well, you're talking what you have in surplus, and there's a policy that you want to be
Well,
6 months of the, what have you, that number, this overlay fluctuates every year. mean,
I know that, but I mean, I know. We typically have, abatements and stuff like that, and that overlay,
20,000.
20,000, okay, all right. That's the number I wanted.
Gotcha.
We were talking about that earlier, but I didn't remember seeing spending more than 20.
Yep,
or
that's the number I
20 or 30,
wanted to
that's in my
yeah,
head
make sure we had a cushion.
Since I've been here.
Yeah.
and that includes last year, which was a heavy abatement year.
Right.
Daryl, are you planning on doing the land?
I do recommend that we do the land this year, and we talked about numbers that actually is 30%, as we said, is land value. So anybody with just a piece of land saw a reduction last year as the rate went down and their value stayed the same. It doesn't appear as though by just going up on land, we're gonna be able to get back to the within 10% of market. Things are just
Really?
crazy. Yeah, we're back. After doing that whole reval, we're back at 50% on most of the sales again.
I was just thinking the overlay would have improvement beyond what you projected here. If you did the plan, we'd be pulling in a bit more
But not,
without having to.
but that's not gonna hit till following year.
Next year, right, but it's there. It lessens the impact of the.
No, I would guess we're gonna have to declare less than, certainly less than 100. Whether we're gonna have to declare 80, and that just means that the homestead and the veterans and they only get 80% of that number, not 100, and we only get 80% of reimbursements from the state instead of 100. But
How's your waterfront holding?
it's right there with the rest of it.
Because I know we didn't have enough sales
We did not have.
and now we have some sales and. It's not, I like that. It's not holding. It's not holding.
Well, I'll make a motion for purposes of discussion, and the motion would be to set it at 0.0156
Is there a second?
for fiscal year 20.
Second.
Discuss a lot?
I guess my motivation there is to minimize the impact this is gonna have on our fixed income folks. I mean, they're the ones who are, they're gonna have a hard time.
I'll second that thought too, because we've got this $81 million bond issue at RSU 40. That is going to be a crusher on our tax rate.
They are coming, just so you know, the school is coming to our next meeting. To do their presentation.
Obviously, that's the lowest we can go.
Yeah.
I mean, last year, we all know that you did due diligence and went out there and did the assessing that we needed to do. And it impacted a lot of people. And then we're gonna see this, and we were at 14 now, it's gonna go to 15, so. We're gonna get some phone calls.
Yep.
We'll get some phone calls. Where else do we get the money? Where else do you get it? You take some from undesignated fund, can you do that? I don't know.
There was 300 of them that were able to freeze their taxes at last year's level. The state would pay the difference, but then that program goes away.
Right, that goes away this year, right?
For
Oh,
next
oh,
year.
Yeah, now there's,
This year it's in.
this year it's in, but next year it'll be income based,
That's right.
which will help, hopefully, the people it was intended to help.
Yep.
I think the legislature did change that.
Right.
That's another. Increment we'll realize next year when those people come off. That tax program,
They will.
that will help someone.
No, it's just coming from them, not the state. So they didn't
Right.
touch the value. It was just on the collection side.
Oh,
So
that's
the
right.
value
The
is
state
still-
reimbursed-
Right.
The state
Reimbursed.
reimbursed what we didn't collect.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, right, sorry.
But they will not see an increase. And then if we have to increase again next year, there'll be a double
A
whammy.
big,
on
a big,
that.
a bigger increase for them, right? Yeah.
Just procedurally. I've heard anecdotally that when the school budget comes out, just the operating budget, and if it doesn't pass a given town meeting or there's a new one issued and then a subsequent vote.
Correct.
And is that going to be the case with this bond issue as well?
So the bond issue, I think they want on the November ballot, which is going to be tough. Because we have to have the ballots to the printers by a certain time. I'm not sure if you've heard from the school yet. But that would be on November. That would be on the November ballot, and then that would hit July in the next year's budget
Maybe
cycle.
next year.
And next year's mill rate, it would hit next year's mill rate.
They have a deadline of August 30th to get a question formulated.
Sorry, Pam.
They have until August 30th to formulate the question and get it to me so I can
Right.
send it to them.
Okay.
And that's all of the towns in the school district that are in the same situation.
Yes, whatever we want locally, it's the same date.
Any more discussion?
Yeah, just again, nuts and bolts type issue. Once you get the bonds, you don't have to start paying for them until you've actually expended funds. So do they have contracts ready to go on day one, or are we looking at issuing a facilities plan, a design award, and then the actual construction? Are we looking at a tax increase next year? Or are we talking about expenditure of those funds in the bond? Are we talking that starting 3 years out and then extending, let's say, 2 more years during the
That's
construction
a great
phase?
question for when they come
You
next.
don't know that.
At the next meeting. What their plan is. I was under the impression they were gonna go to the bond bank in the spring of 2024, which would mean they're taking that money then, you start paying then.
And let's hope rates are coming down by then.
Well,
If it passes.
If it passes.
if it passes.
I mean, 81 million is a big ask.
That's a big ask.
It's a huge
You know,
ask.
and to have it all in one lump sum is huge, and but like me, can't figure out why they can't spend, say $5 or $10 million over the course of several years to do it. And you have to do it during the summertime. That's an awful lot of construction to try and cram into 2 months during the middle of the summer.
I think those are excellent questions for when Brian and superintendent come to speak with us at the next meeting.
Everyone set? Guess you guys can vote. All in favor of the mill rate being 0.0156? All opposed? What else you do? One abstaining?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's a discussion that maybe we have to have through the budget committee is what level of services do people expect and what do they want? You know, and that becomes the age old question. And when you put it to the voter, you know, they vote. It's a tough thing when you start talking about how much police coverage do you want? How much EMS coverage do you want? You know, what do you want your school to look like? What do you want snow plowing to look like? You know, those are all interesting questions. And I think the budget committee and the select board has done a phenomenal job over the last, at least since I can only speak to when I've been here, of actually looking at all of these questions. And we start off every budget committee meeting, and I think we have for the last 6 years, saying, you know, this is your, you know, really the budget committee drives what the budget looks like.
And a lot of it's been out of our control.
And a
Because
lot of
prices
it
of
in
stuff's through the roof.
the last 3 years has been out of our control. And I never always want to say this is this past budget and the budget before, there was a lot of cost saving measures that were done that we really did champion doing differently. So it could have been a lot worse. I don't know if that makes you feel any better.
Well, if I could. I don't think the general public really understands, because I was involved in that, Mike we were all involved in that. How much we actually cut
Right.
from day one to the time we voted on it.
Right.
They only saw it,
Including our own stipend.
right,
Right.
the majority of the public only saw that final number. They didn't see the work that was put in. Maybe something we could think about next year is actually showing what was presented first and what we whittled it down to.
Okay.
Usually have a summary from me that does that.
But does it go out to the public?
We could do that in the tax
Right.
bill,
Yeah.
but we could put that in the tax bill. I mean, I can write something. As we learned, though, I actually put something on the back of the tax bill one year and people were telling me they didn't know. And I was like, but it's on the back of your
Right.
tax bill. But it would be a good thing. It would be a good exercise.
But even in June, when if we go into the vote, even to have that on the.
Oh, you would
somewhere,
like it to say, so you
initial-
almost like it to say on the question. It was initial budget committee select board approved. Okay.
Back in the day when we used to have open town meeting, that's what could really see the negotiations between. select
I
board,
love
the
that
budget
idea.
committee. You know, I'll just throw this out, fire department. $200,000 budget. Open town meeting, someone from the floor can stand up and ask the questions. And they can actually, people from floor can actually help if that budget cut. That the budget committee and the select board will vote on.
So you'd like to see like a little budget snapshot under each line? Like initial budget committee, select board, fine.
Right, something, so everyone can see what we cut, because I'd be willing to bet, a lot of people don't know, we cut, how much did we cut?
Cut over $1 million.
$500,000.
At least $1 million.
Yeah, it's half of somewhere on there, over $500,000.
I'm already doing that, so it's not a big deal.
We just have to put it on the ballot.
I know it's.
I would be nice to Pam.
There'll just be more to read.
Well, and that's the other thing that we have a lot of complaints about is how long the ballot is, but at the same token. you can get it by mail now. You can you can have your coffee and do your
Absentee ballot.
absentee ballot, so. But I like that. The more information we can give people, and I agree, John, that's one of my most frustrating things is when somebody says something and I'll be like, well, you don't realize how hard, you know. In most towns, the budget committee meets 2 or 3 times. Our budget committee meets year round and are very well informed, so.
I can also add something to the voter guide.
Yeah, since we did a voter guide, Pam started the voter guide, we can add a whole bunch of things to that. Great input, thank you.
So move along, no public hearings. We already did adjustments to the agenda. Is there any citizens' comments? Seeing none, select board comments. Bob?
I have one. Just take a note that on October 5th, 4th and 5th of this year, the MMA will host its annual convention at the Augusta Civic Center. And we can all go.
Yep.
If we wish to. They have an interesting program this year.
Cool. John,
No, I have nothing.
Mike,
I have some comments about one of the later items, but
Okay.
nothing new.
all right, town managers report.
Oh, the town manager, she's just crazy. Couple of things. I just wanted to announce, I'm sure hopefully people noticed it on Facebook, but our Stan Waltz, our code enforcement officer, who's been here, he's our 3rd longest employee after John Daigle and Rose, retired and is settling into a life of retirement. And we would just like to thank him for all of his wonderful years of service. Stan was, when I was buying a house in Damariscotta in 2011, I called the Damariscotta town office, my first experience in Maine with local government. And they said, oh, here's the cell phone number. I'm like, well, what time should I call him? You just call him anytime. So I'm from New Jersey. I'm thinking, no, you call between 9 and 4.
Yeah.
So I call this number. I leave this message. I'm thinking, I don't even know if it's the right. I don't know. We'll see what happens. This wonderful man called me back and he said, well, where are you buying? Oh, next to Wilder. Okay. So he told me about the smelt shacks that would be out on Salt Bay and what you could catch in the creek, and that there were oysters actually in Oyster Creek, but don't eat them because you could get sick. He was just a wealth of knowledge. And it was, as a public servant, it was great to talk to another public servant who truly embraced being helpful and truly a gentleman. And then who knew in 2011 that in 2017, I would come here and I would inherit Stan, the man, as our code enforcement official. And he was just a pleasure to work with, and we wish him all the best. And I just wanted to say publicly thank you to him. And he is missed. We absolutely love Mark. He's great too, but it is a little bit different to walk in and not have Stan's face right there. So I just want to say thank you to Stan. That's all I have.
All right, we'll move along. This consent calendar. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'd motion to approve it. But with one change to the minutes for the July 25th meeting.
Okay,
And I know it's difficult to hear, especially me when I'm talking at this end of the table. The mic doesn't pick everything up sometimes. So the first part of that note about my comments is correct regarding the G402 emergency management extensive training. That should be a period after that, because that had nothing to do with wetlands and rivers or anything like that. So I would just suggest a revision in the following sentence to the effect that Butler also stated that a local survey of wetlands in Waldoboro could help to identify those which are critical buffers for the preservation and health of the Potomac River. And if that can be picked up,
Email that to
then
me.
I'm good.
Will you email that to me?
Yes, I will.
Is there a
A
second?
second.
A second with those changes to the minutes for the July 25th meeting? Is there any more discussion on it? Seeing none, all those in favor? Right, new business, Lincoln County Budget Advisory Committee.
It's starting the most wonderful time of the year. And for calendar year, counties and municipalities, now it's budget time. And on September 21st at 3:00 PM. We have been asked, all of municipal officers, that would be all of you, are invited to the Lincoln County Courthouse, to the Superior Courtroom. To start talking about the Lincoln County budget
That's in Wisconsin.
in Wisconsin.
Give a street address.
So that would be Thursday, September 21st, and I will make a reminder for all of you.
Yep.
And then normally, what happens is one or two of you get to volunteer to sit
Be on the board.
on the advisory board,
I've been on.
so. I know you've done your time, Bob's done his time,
It's interesting.
you two might have to do your, I think it would be fun for you.
I don't think I can.
Oh, you can't, it would be a
Conflict of interest.
conflict of interest, so Mike, you might be it.
I may have to resign from some more town committees if this keeps going.
Oh. So. How's that?
That could get heated though. If I was on.
I would think it would be interesting to see you and your dad. I would actually think that could be a lot of fun.
Trust me, I had, after the ones I went to, your father visited me at the house.
There is nothing like seeing Bill Blodgett show up at your door.
Yep.
And he has a certain stride, John, when he wants to have a serious son or daughter talk of, now let me tell you how it was.
All right, moving along, the municipal building HVAC. So, Max, you are front and center the way it looks.
Well, as you know, we have some HVAC problems.
Yes, we do.
Yep. The plan is to just put out an RFP, see what we can get. Unfortunately, I was waiting for Efficiency Maine because they kept teasing about that rural retrofits, but Waldeboro doesn't count as a rural community in their eyes because we have more than 5,000 people. So we would just be considered standard rebates for the pumps or HVAC upgrades. So the RFP you have is based on what Belfast submitted, and we would put it out to bid, so people begin for responses.
That's Belfast, Maine, the town. It's not a company, it's Belfast, this model that there.
No, this is Ireland. No, Belfast, Maine.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know whether there was a company called Belfast. I just.
I just want to stress that our heating part of the HVAC here, the boiler is in wonderful condition. We would not just be reliant in the winter on heat pumps, because I know that becomes a huge question. But we need a control system that works, because our control system, when it was purchased in 2010 or 2009,
About 15 somewhere.
was already discontinued. But it was cheap.
Yeah.
So we just have to make sure the control gets purchased.
So the RFP, at least the way I have it, is two options pretty much. It would be bids for people who either fix up this system, reuse it with a VRF or new HVAC system, or someone would just give us a proposal to install heat pumps from together. We still have this HVAC system, but you now have to repeat heat pumps. So those are the two options we kind of give to people.
I have a question, not really a question, but a thought. I worked in this business for a number of years, knowing how, especially up in that ceiling. You want these turned in by the 31st of August.
Yeah, I kind of can move that date. I just put a date in there.
Knowing how it works,
Yeah.
that really isn't enough time. But to get, anyone can come in here and say, I can give you a number, but you want to have a properly designed system. BTU loss, I want to look at the history and whatnot. So it's gonna take them a little bit, a reputable company is gonna take a little while to get you that information back.
What do you suggest for a date?
I'll be willing, and probably end of September.
So October,
I mean, even then, you might have to give some extension. I know a couple of these companies, they're booked out just to do estimate.
Yeah, I mean,
And just to come in and, yeah, I can give you a number on putting heat pumps in, but you wanted to have something that's bang for the buck. Maybe even geothermal or something like that. You already got the duct work in place.
love to have that. Yeah, that's the thing. I just put the date in there because
That could scare some people away if they see that, so.
don't want to scare anyone away. I just kind of put that in there because I would like to have my office not have an AC unit be dependent for the admin building next summer, but I also get that there's a lot of need right now, so if there was someone who could meet that soon date, that'd be great, but you're right, I'm fine having the date extend quite a bit away.
I have a couple of comments about the evaluation of the proposal. In electricity, nothing is simple. This would be a fairly substantial heating system in the winter, and 3 million BTUs an hour might be a number that comes off of the top of my head for building this large with an open garage. That's a fairly significant size heat pump. And we, of course, get electricity from our solar farm. But if we have net metering, except unless we go over and get into a different rate structure. Net metering assumes that we have consumption roughly equivalent to residential rates. But if we go into from residential rates to small general service, which I think the cutoff is 20 kilowatts. So if we get a unit that's bigger than 20 kilowatts and it's operating during the winter, we will be billed at a different rate. And we won't be net metering for the full bill, not the 26 or 27 cents per kilowatt hour. We would only get net metering for the 16.6 cents per kilowatt hour, because we would be assessed a demand charge. And that's actually in our power purchase contract from Central Maine Power. So it's just when we were evaluating these proposals, what may look like a favorable evaluation because of a putative low cost based on a residential rate might not be a low cost offer if we're getting an SGS rate from Central Maine Power. And that's purely dependent on how intense your usage is, not how much you use, but how.
so Mike, you want to be on the evaluation committee?
I would volunteer for. It's not easy. And as you pointed out, the need for backup heat in the event of a failure of the heat pump during the winter. A lot of insurers are canceling policies if the heat pump is the only source of heat because in an extended power outage, and we don't get any of them from Central Maine Power, do we?
What comes, and this is part of this is what has stymied us at times with this whole thing is, are heat pumps the answer? They seem to get the most rebates. Is a geothermal system even a better idea? Like what, I mean, we've thrown all this around and, do we fix what we have?
And
And it does make a difference when we were deciding whether or not to buy the solar field is, then is this a better for the town than paying for the fuel oil? But we also still have to have that system exactly because you need the backup.
well, assuming that you had two heat up units. And they could provide some level of heat if one of them was down. There's several ways to skin that cat, but you would need our emergency generator to have enough capacity to feed those heat pumps in order to get
Mhm.
a pass from the insurance company.
Right.
So it's fairly complicated and I'll volunteer.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Bob.
I think we ought to attach to this proposal a copy of the CMP contract with the town. Okay. So they understand what our here is and how that works. And make sure they know we have a single. And KW. The other thing I would have suggested somewhere in here is mentioning that they're welcome to come into the building and look at what's gone.
By appointment.
By appointment, but that's not in here, and I think it should be, so they understand visits are allowed. They really have to see.
Yeah, because
To know what they're
you
gonna.
get someone come in, doesn't get up in that field and see what you have, air handlers, and what you have stuff for and sizing. Right. Do they really know what they're talking about? Yeah.
Another thing, have you looked into doing the geothermal as potentially putting this RFP out?
Not geothermal.
Well, that's when you say in the HVAC world, when you say heat pump.
Yeah.
You automatically think that's what geothermal is. It's a heat pump. It's a ground source heat pump versus an air source heat pump.
So they could also look at that. as
Yeah,
part of
it's all a heat pump. It's just whether it comes from the air or it comes from the ground.
I got you.
The RFPs. I tried to make the RFP broad. I don't know if you want to have it narrowed down. I pretty much say in the opening, whether it's heat pumps, like the split system that you'll see everywhere, fixing up this HVAC, or could be geothermal, anything. I just want an AC unit next summer.
Don't we all?
Heat pumps work awesome for AC units.
Whatever
Yeah.
proposal someone has, we're open to it. Yeah, I want that out.
I'll reference the contract,
Yep.
the exact section, it's section 4D is governing. It applies only to kilowatt hours and any other charges. If they assess demand charges, it's not net metering anymore.
This is the CMP contract.
CMP contract, section D4.
That should go out with the package next.
Yep, that'll be a new appendix.
Cool. Anything else?
So by updating it, then coming back to the select board or.
I think you can just,
Yeah.
do you trust him to update it and then just put it out, or do you want him to come back to the board?
I think we want to get it moving.
Yes,
Go.
absolutely. Anything else, Max, you need from us? Got your marching orders?
Including 4D of the contract, to the appendix, not changing the dates and including the full text.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, sir. All right, we'll move on to old business. Sylvania update.
I will turn that over to Bob and Mike because I could not attend the meeting yesterday because I had a community navigator. Presentation I had to make.
Okay, well, the first part of the presentation was about potential layouts for the they paved parts of the property and it had pickleball courts, tennis courts, and I think one basketball court. There was talk about a pavilion and there was talk about solar panels on the site. This is really a little bit differently than I think what we all envisioned of a park-like atmosphere. But we do want to maintain our commitments for the tennis courts. So that's been added. There was a pretty extensive discussion about what can be done on site. There's going to be a lot of impervious area, whether it's asphalt or a concrete slab on top of the existing slab or
That's
whatever.
that's one of the
And
questions. I had.
drainage was an issue. There was some discussion about plantings. Planters actually, like concrete planters on top of the slab, which would imply that there'd be maintenance involved with that and probably the need for new construction hose bib or something so that we can water the whatever's in the planters.
One, I also have the plants that Barbara showed yesterday.
Okay, sure.
That would be
Sure,
great.
put it up, yep.
There were two, so I'm trying to find one of the more detailed. Yeah, this, I'm just gonna quickly share the screen. for you. This is the. Hopefully everyone's.
Yeah, this is the area that they were talking about, in the blue and green areas in the bottom left. Those were the basketball courts, pickleball courts, tennis courts. Kids play area about the center of the picture in yellow. And then the parking in the back. There was some talk of a pavilion as well, and I don't think we came to any sort of conclusion as to what it should be. I think, Bob, you'd like to see a pavilion that could cover cover a skating rink. I think you were
I have no
thinking about that.
preconception. Yeah, no, I just brought that up because if you're gonna have a skating rink, this is probably a good place to have it. I just don't know if it works from a
Yeah.
planning standpoint.
Yeah.
You gotta have water available.
Yeah,
And a fairly flat surface.
Yeah.
It's just something we tossed out.
and how to get drainage on the sites where those courts are could be an issue. You probably have to have like grassy breaks in between the various components so that the water could drain off of the courts and to a drainage swale leading to the back of the property. So it's gonna go to
Barbara's gonna do one more iteration. And show it to us between now, I guess, at the next meeting.
Mhm.
And you're gonna talk to UMO. And toss something their way to see what they are interested in doing. I mean, we haven't spent any money yet, so
yeah,
we're getting lots of help from volunteers. Barbara's been amazing.
The open air pavilion also would be a great place for not just a skating rink, but picnic tables during the summer for summer rec.
people are thinking of a farmer's market underneath. the
Farmer's
pavilion.
market. You could do a lot of stuff under there. And then if you really wanted the solar, you could put it on top of the pavilion.
That was
And
suggested.
there was discussion about lighting. And how that's controlled if we have it. I'm not sure that the entire committee was in favor of lighting. They're concerned about, and did you bring up, no, it was Matt who brought up the light pollution.
Yes.
We have it, make sure that it's not creating light pollution, that everything's downward in direction. But that's one other thing that we probably ought to be looking at least to ensure we considered it. And if we decide to take it out, then that's that. But I could see some situations where it would be useful. For example, if the town has a function at night and needs lighting to illuminate parking areas or walking areas for safety, that might be something we can control. And if we could turn the lights on and off, as we can with some of the LED lights we have now, that all helps in the process. Did we cover it?
I think as far as this is concerned, we also talked about the House's house quite a lot.
Anyone have any questions on this layout or?
Very early, very early.
Conceptual.
Napkin sized back of the napkin.
I'll apologize up front. I certainly appreciate everyone's effort, just the committee working on this. Someone made the comment, I was watching it from home, by the way. And someone made the comment, I think that Matt made the comment that are we looking too big too soon? And are we trying to eat the whole elephant right now? Why don't we take it bite by bite? You know, let's get the place cleaned up, looking nice, somewhat usable. Does all that stuff have to be on there for that property to be usable?
I don't think the committee is under any illusion that this is gonna happen in one fell swoop. I think that there has been discussion
Different
of
phases.
a timeline and phasing things in, and maybe the first thing we do is the trail system.
And to clean up as you drive by and you're looking something.
Yes, sure, no, that's part of it. You're raising an important point. No, I don't think that's out of line with the context of our discussions at all. I think we're all on the same page.
And
I
I don't
just
think
don't-
we've had a discussion about how it's gonna be financed either.
No, we haven't even talked. about
Right.
it.
I mean, we haven't
That's
talked
what-
about
that's what
money
I'm
at all
saying.
yet.
Yeah,
I don't want to be sitting here, or maybe I won't be sitting here 5 years from now, still talking about the same old thing. The way it looks right now.
So we need the conceptual plan from the engineer to be able to apply for grants that would accomplish this.
Right.
So that's why we have to start somewhere and we should just, if we're gonna do a conceptual plan, do it all at once. How we phase it, we can always explain in the grant applications.
but to take on what Julie's just said, the engineer needs to know what we want to do.
What our end result.
Yeah, he needs to know that, otherwise he can't do anything of any use to us.
And I'm glad that Jim Letney's there because I do think that we had guidance from the voters. The Sylvania committee is also weighing in, and it's really important that we include our recreation committee and the recreation department in this, because ultimately this is a lot of recreation.
And Jim and Marcus were at that meeting.
Yes, I'm
They
glad.
were there and they said they had good input.
Good.
Yep. So we did talk about the Hofstas house. And I get Mike's concern completely. I mean, the longer we put this down the road, the more danger we have of not having a house to sell, because it's not gonna stay in shape very long. Other concerns though relate to the timing of the RFP. And Patty Fazio, I think she raises an important point. We want to have responses to that RFP by whatever you said, December 30. No, you want the house gone by December 31st. That was what the.
So
RFP
I gotta stop everybody right here, because I gotta tell you, I got an email today and
When did I?
I should have been at that, I should have been at that meeting yesterday. I prepared an RFP based on what I was given by my select board, who is the ultimate authority. An advisory committee, you took their advice. I did what I was asked to do.
You did,
I did it quickly
you did.
and I did it efficiently
You
and I
did.
did it professionally.
Yep, correct.
And today I received an email that basically said that somebody is trying to make sure this building gets demolished. So I want to publicly say that is not true.
No.
So I don't know where yesterday's meeting about changing some dates on an RFP that hasn't been put out already turned into the email I got today, but that needs to stop.
Where did that come from, Julie?
Member of the committee. And I'm putting it on record right now. I was highly offended by that,
Me too.
highly offended by the wording of that. So I want everybody to be clear before this takes a life of its own and it becomes. I've been here for 6 years. I inherited A.D. Gray. I went through Friendship Street School. I do not want the Hofstas house to turn into that. That's not going to be my legacy when I leave here.
And
And I have no problem changing a date. But the life that took on today was not, I was not deserving of that. And if we want to change the date, we can change the date. But that decision has to come from the committee. Take the advisory committee's advice, but that comes from the select
From the
board,
select board, not-
from the select board. I did what I was asked by the select board. And I think everybody has to understand that the select board ultimately has that authority. Everybody appreciates the volunteers. And I get it, and I get that it's a slow moving process. Nobody knows more about bureaucracy than I do. And nobody dislikes it more than I do. But it's true. But there's things we have to do. And I was tasked with, let's get this done so that that house does not sit through another winter and then become unsellable. We already had one person turn in an offer for the house. So obviously there's one already floating around out there. We had a gentleman in today who expressed interest in it. So I mean, I don't care what the date is, but somebody has to just tell me before I put it out. And I know I'm very excitable about this stuff, but I take what we do in this town office extremely seriously. And I take what is, people don't realize what goes on here and how hard my team works, how hard Max works on this, how hard I work on this. If I could have split myself in two yesterday and fulfilled both obligations, I would have, and maybe it wouldn't have turned into this. But everybody here in that town office has the best of Waldoboro in their hearts, and we work really hard every day to make this the best place to work and live. And I just had to say that.
My perception after yesterday's meeting, and you made the point, I think we established as a priority that if someone comes in and says, we're gonna move the house to another location in Waldoboro, and you brought that up, and we all sat there and said, yeah, I don't get where this demolish comes in, Julie. That makes absolutely no sense to me. That wasn't even talked about very.
All I know is I should have been there. I wasn't. But I can't split myself into and serve two masters.
Okay.
I had to pick the master that needed me the most.
There were two things that came out of the RFP. One is it should mention that the foundation is part of the process.
Right.
Because it was pointed out that there's a lot of value in that, and that went right by me. I had no idea, but yeah, there's carved stone in that foundation.
Right.
Someone's gonna want to pull it out. And then the concept was, yeah, leave the completion date at December 31st, but indicate clearly that it's something we were willing to talk about
Okay.
if a proposal comes in that we really, really like. Those were really, was there something else that I missed?
No, that was exactly the discussion.
Yeah.
And we had an extension discussion about a bid versus a proposal. We're asking for proposals.
That's right.
And I have, in my career, I've answered a lot of requests for proposals with conditions on them. I can't do it in this like a time, or maybe you want to do it this way, and we would prefer to do it this way, or we can meet this standard, but not this standard. It happens all the time. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, it is. So I would make a motion that we put out the RFP as drafted by our town manager
Like I said, I don't care about the date.
To
Just somebody has
indicate-
to tell me what they're
to
doing.
indicate the foundation is part of the request and to indicate that the completion date is set at December 31st, 2023 and is negotiable.
Is there a second?
Second,
Any more discussion?
Well, the only discussion I have is, just like I brought up a lot, maybe they're getting it from me. Because
Yeah.
again, my fear is, let's say December 31st, no one buys it, no one wants it. What do we do with it then? So that's why we had that second
Second
question.
question.
That second question that's on the special town meeting to unfortunately take it down.
Because then I think what I gleaned from the email I saw was then there could be a commercial sale of the property. But then again, you guys have to consider, do we then want to have a commercial venture surrounded by our
No.
recreation? So that again is a whole discussion that you guys have to have.
Well, we have, we're gonna have the meeting on September 12th. The town will speak. The RFP will be out there. We'll know people are gonna respond and have an interest, and hopefully it won't be like Friendship Street School or 80 grade, and we'll have this taken care of soon.
Well, and I just hope everybody realizes that that's what I inherited,
Yes, you did.
and that AD Gray took up an inordinate amount of time.
Yeah.
And effort. And I love what I do for this community. But the Friendship Street School also came up to that. And the one thing that everybody has always said is, why does it take so long? And we can look back now and say, we should have done this or should have done that. I want to get it right the first time. That's all. I just want to get it right the first time.
Any more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? We're good to go. All right, items for the next meeting.
We have the school coming. I think that will take up the entire meeting.
It's also a public hearing, correct?
Yes.
The public meeting for Sylvania,
Public hearing.
public hearing for C, yeah.
For the warrant and then,
For the special town meeting.
and then the.
Do you think that's gonna take up the meeting? So,
Oh, I think the school, I mean, if.
Yep.
I am assuming that if you're asking for $81 million, it's gonna be quite the presentation.
Sure.
I'm assuming.
And hopefully we'll have residents here.
Well, I was gonna make sure we have good advertising for that. I do want to say one other thing. I forgot under my report. I got all Stan the man in my head. September 8th, big time in Waldeboro. We are having September 8th between 5 and 10. We are having Fintown Road and the Watts Hall Band performing in the Worcester parking lot, which will be closed off. And it's a big celebration with music, thanks to the efforts of the 250th anniversary committee. Those two bands could not perform and they are now going to be performing. It's a Friday night. There'll be food.
Time,
5 to 10 is when the bands are going to be there. It'll be a great time. Please come out and support the bands and just, this is something that people, again, for the last 6 years have been asking for. Oh, I remember how Waldeboro Day, we used to have something downtown. This is something downtown. It can support our businesses and it'll be a lot of fun and really good music. We can dance. Never mind, I'm done.
those of us who can.
And those of us who can't dance can just sit there and enjoy the music.
We can borrow school dance.
all right. Somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Don't look at the clock. All those in favor? All those in favor?
Only an hour.